Okay, I believe that we are live. Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for being a part of the very first annual Bronx Social Justice Matters Film Festival. My name is Angela Wambugu Cobb. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Development and Alumni Relations at Bronx Community College. This weekend, we have attendees from around the world who are participating in our festival, and we're very excited about it. And we appreciate you all being here today for our first and very exciting panel, Advancing Social Justice, Film, Fervor, and Focus. But before we begin, I'm going to turn this mic over to our Vice President, Dr. Lester Sandres Rapolo, who is coming to give us some greetings, and then we'll go right into our panel.
Thank you so much, VP Angela Wambuko. I'm so excited, honored, and privileged to be part of this panel today and work along the lines with such a stellar filmmakers, members of the community, and to carry on the powerful message that our university chancellor, Dr. Felix Matos Rodriguez, has always championed, which is equity, access, diversity, and inclusion across all CUNY and New York City campus that we have. Also, just to welcome each and every one of you for this wonderful opportunity. Enjoy it. This is for us. This is a safe space for us to enjoy the art of film and entertainment. And I also want to say thank you to Dr. Deborah Gonchar for championing and loving and always being the trailblazer and the leader that she is for putting this effort together, and all the members of BCC, Lehman, and hostels that help us throughout the way. Thank you. Enjoy it and have a wonderful time. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, VP Rapolo. And before we begin, we must give thanks to our generous sponsors who made the support and who gave their support and made this weekend possible for us. First, we have our presenting gold sponsor, Bronx Pro, which is a woman-owned neighborhood-based firm dedicated to community development. And we thank them so much for their continuous support of BCC and their leadership support for this weekend's festival. We also want to thank our dedicated and longtime friends and community sponsor, Popular Bank. And of course, as VP Rapolo mentioned, our event partners, Lehman College, Hostos College, and Bronx Community College Foundation. So now let's get started with our panel discussion. Joining us is an incredible panel of nationally and now also internationally, because we know this is being seen internationally, renowned social justice advocates. They will discuss their thoughts on today's social justice movement and where we should go from here. Our participants today include Elizabeth Piemps, Director of Bronx Community College's Future Now, a nationally recognized model of high-performing high school equivalency and college transition program for low income and justice-involved youth. We also have Dr. Kianga Yamada Taylor, CUNY graduate and professor of African American history at Princeton University. She's a contributing writer for the New Yorker magazine and author of the books Race for Profit, How Banks and Real Estate Industry Undermine Black Home Ownership, and From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation. We also have Mr. Attica J. Torrance, who is a producer, director, writer, and author of the book Brooklyn Bred, a producer of Time, the Khalif Browder Story, and two-time Emmy-nominated filmmaker for Rest in Power, the Trayvon Martin Story. And finally, our moderator is Eileen Markey, assistant professor of journalism at Lehman College, investigative journalist specializing in urban policy and social movements, and author of A Radical Faith, The Assassination of Sister Mora. I now turn the panel over to you, Eileen.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here. Welcome to all these wonderful panelists. Thank you, the wide family of CUNY, for making this possible, for making this happen. Just to begin, maybe you could tell us why you're here. Elizabeth and Attica and Kianga, why is this something you feel passionately about, the work of social justice and the work of film and social justice, and really the work of CUNY, right? Tell us what brought you here today, and maybe I'll start with Elizabeth.
Let me take the unmute button. Thank you so much, Eileen. Thank you, everyone, for inviting Future Now to be part of this wonderful event. I want to thank our VP Lester Rapalos and VP Angela Cobb for always supporting Future Now, and all the students who come to Bronx community to finish their education. We work with a lot of students who are formerly incarcerated, either at Rikers or are on probation. And we see the change, and it's a very rewarding job. I have to say, it's not a job. I mean, it's been 24 years. I have over 7,000 students who have gotten their GEDs and gone on to college at BCC, and who have not only changed their own lives, but also the lives of so many other people that come behind them. So I'm passionate about Future Now. I'm passionate about all the students and all the talent that I'm lucky to see every day walk through the doors, and the achievements that they make. Half of the staff at Future Now graduated from Future Now, and is able to help other people now do the same. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to speaking with all of you.
And Kianga.
Hey there. Thanks to the organizers for the invitation to come here today, especially to Angela, who I went to school with at City College in the 1990s. I'm not actually a CUNY graduate. I'm a CUNY dropout, but I went to City College for 3 years during a very important, formative point in my life, both in terms of my own intellectual development, but also politically. CUNY in the 1990s was certainly an epicenter of political activism around the demand that public education actually be open, accessible, and affordable to the working class of New York. And I think that, that mission is now more important than it's ever been, as the gap between the richest people in this country in the 5 boroughs of New York gets even bigger compared to the poor and working class who make that city and make this country operate. So I think, the importance to CUNY is undoubted. And I think the larger goals around what we call social justice is deeply and intimately related to that. I think that we've seen over the last couple of years that the politics and priorities in this country have been skewed. You have people working harder for less. You have the threat of eviction hanging over people's heads. You have healthcare crisis, jobs crisis, all sorts of things. And, we need to use the money and the resources that we have, whether it's New York, whether it's the United States. I live in Philadelphia. We have the same issues here. We need to use the resources and money that we have to make people's lives better and make people's lives easier. And we know that that won't happen just because it should. And so the social movements that have been at the center of our political attention over the last several years are really critical to making that happen. And so any opportunity to talk about that and to think about that is one that we should take advantage of. And so in that spirit, I'm very happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you. And Attica.
Thank you very much for having me. As we speak about CUNY, I must say rest in peace to Colin Powell. We just lost a giant, and he's a, if I'm not mistaken, he's a City College graduate. So yeah, I actually attended SUNY school, but my purpose for being here, I'm glad I was asked, and I don't show up to everything that I'm asked to be at, but the social justice panel, my parents were heavy in all sorts of movements, thus my name is Attica. And I just think it's very important to to raise the next generation, because I think our leaders and our beacons, and they're sitting amongst us often, and I think it's very important to inspire those who can lead us into our next phase of social justice, our next phase of civil rights, human rights. And my main thing is, you fight with the weapons you have. I work in media. I work in film. I call my camera my weapon of mass production. Whatever. If you're a singer, if you're an artist, if you're a teacher, if you're a barber, one of my definitions of success is you positively influence those over whom you have influence, whether it's 2 people or 2 million. So I just believe that social justice is something that we should keep on the forefront, and keep our eyes on that, because we can always do better. And that's why I'm here. I thank you all for asking me to come, and I'm glad I was able to show up. So I'm here.
Thinking about film, thinking about storytelling, what role does narrative, what role does storytelling have in movements for justice, or in how we conceive of the world, how we dream of a different one? Can you talk a little bit about that, about storytelling? How does that fit into the work that sometimes I think feels very, maybe dry is not quite the right word, but strategic. We're looking for changing laws, we're looking for changing policies, we're looking for changing how funding is allocated. But where does storytelling come into that? True storytelling or fictional storytelling? And yeah, you go ahead, Attica.
Sure.
The weapons of mass production.
Okay. Well, media. I believe media was designed for mind control. I just think it's just that simple. And people. I just believe media was made for mind control. So as it relates to the power that media has, and no matter what's going on, we are dealing with a constant barrage of information, and storytelling, as it relates to a constant barrage of information, is designed to hit a specific demographic. And if you look at it on a grand scale, every time we're in war, or any country is in war, one of the first things that they take over is the airwaves. They take over radio, they take over television, and there's a reason for that. That's media. Now, narrative storytelling is you putting your spin on the story. Fictional storytelling is you putting your spin on the story. And even if it's a documentary, which many people believe are all true, the same way many people believe reality television is reality, the reality is there is a demographic for it. And if you can shed light on some atrocities or some injustice, then I think that's what you should do. I believe with my form of storytelling, I like to speak to human stories, and do my best to better shift our situation. So I believe it's very powerful. A lot of people believe what they see. Believe it or not, people still think Sylvester Stallone can get in the ring and fight. Like, that's just the way storytelling works. And if you believe Sylvester Stallone can get in the ring and still fight at 60, maybe 70 years old, then we got to figure out what stories are we really telling. And I just think it's just that. It just boils down to that. Media was designed to control the human mind. And I think that, in a nutshell, answers, why it's so important. And as it relates to shifting any type of legislation, I mean, with the Khalif Browder project, which I'm sorry I did not produce, I produced Rest in Power. I worked on the Khalif Browder project, but that has begun to shift some legislation. We see what Ava DuVernay did with When They See Us, and the DA and their procedures are getting they're opening cases and figuring out what went wrong there. And even if we go as far back as to Johnny Cochran, O.J. Simpson case, he didn't speak about whether O.J. was innocent or guilty. He spoke about the procedures that were taking place in the DA's office, and that was the problem. And that was all, it was shed light on that through media. Now you have different forms of media. That was news media. We have narrative media and story, but it's all storytelling. All of it is storytelling.
All this storytelling, which makes me think about Kianga's work, telling a story that was, some people knew about redlining, right? Some people knew about urban renewal and suburbanization in the completely racialized way in which the second half of the, I mean, every century, but the second half of the 20th century played out. But in your work, you've shifted the paradigm on how we're talking about that. From maybe a smaller group of people who were motivated about understanding how these things operated, to being able to speak of it for more, to put it, that experience like at the center of understanding how the economy worked in the last 70 years and how that literally the shaping of the nation and the suburbs and the East Coast and West Coast and center, like how it all worked, right? That's what your work did in the latest book. So what I wanted to ask you about is really the role of storytelling and information sharing in movement in order to expand and push out the edges of what's understood. It's really an Overton window question, right? What's the acceptable parameters of discourse? And can you speak about maybe using different platforms, right? You're a professor, you write for The New Yorker, you have experience in more alternative media, and you're huge on Twitter. Can you talk about that, the use of multiple platforms, and that Overton window question?
So the first thing I would say, just, a quick thing about storytelling. I mean, part of it is about reaching a broader audience through someone's own personal story in ways that kind of banal discussions about policy, about a particular piece of legislation doesn't necessarily communicate. If it's, Black Lives Matter and you can talk about the life of, Breonna Taylor, then that's more impactful than just talking about police reform or this or that kind of bill. And so being able to kind of unpack these larger, almost abstract questions about policy through the lives and experiences of ordinary people who are ultimately impacted by these decisions is about being effective. And so for me, in my book, Race for Profit, in particular, which is an examination of what happens after fair housing is passed, what happens after redlining is made illegal, and how do we understand why and the ways in which these processes continue to happen even after they have been outlawed. Part of, I think, the effectiveness of my book is through highlighting the experiences of poor and working class Black women who were often targeted for predatory housing programs, and then who were conversely blamed for the failure of those programs in ways that were manipulated by the right to create a caricature of the welfare state, and to ultimately conclude that, public provision, the welfare state itself is something that is not necessary because these women's lives are so dysfunctional and problematic that these public programs won't actually help them. I think by actually looking at some of these women individually and being able to tell not their stories entirely, but to give some insight into why they made the decisions that they made and the kinds of duress that they were under was imperative to being able to communicate in a different way some of the problems with public policies that don't actually help the people that they are intended to. And just the last thing about different platforms, I think part of that is about how one approaches the purpose of their work in the first place. And so, I'm an academic, but I come out of an organizing background. That was what ultimately led me into the academy in the first place. And it really is where I see the point of my work. The point of my work is not to necessarily engage in abstract academic debates for their own sake, but to generate knowledge and insight about the way our world and society functions in order to change it. And to do that, it means that you have to write broadly. And I hope that, I've been able, to demonstrate that it is possible to write for broad audiences and still check the box of, academic rigor or, intellectual rigor. I have always felt like I don't want to ever write about the people and subjects that I write about in such a way that those people can't understand what it is that I'm saying. And so, it reads differently in the New Yorker than it might, in a book with a bunch of footnotes. But I think that it's still kind of in plain spoken English that communicates basic ideas about what the problems in our society are, sort of uncovering those, and in some cases, what it is that we should be doing about them and how we address them.
Elizabeth, when I think about this question, this kind of way of thinking, when I'm thinking about the work of Future Now, I guess I'm thinking about the stories that the students who come to you through Future Now bring with them. And you've talked really beautifully about the role of empathy in your work and in the sort of work that Future Now tries to not be one more program, but rather be something that really is transformational and that really takes in the students you work with as full people with faith, right? Like with belief in what they deserve and what they're capable of. So maybe can you talk a little bit about kind of like the conception of themselves that students bring with them when they come in through Future Now, and how you're trying to work around that sense of storytelling? Who am I and what am I doing as a student?
So thank you, Eileen. So what I was thinking as I was listening to Arka and Kianja is how many students want to change their stories, right? So we see a lot of students who are part of this narrative and they come here to BCC with the hopes of through education, a college degree. I think about 99% of our students are the first ones to go to college in their families. And I cannot speak about this topic without thinking of Khalif, that Arika always mentions so beautifully. And Khalif is also somebody that through his storytelling, and I remember him saying all the time that he didn't think he was powerful. And I don't think he thought, I don't think he understood the power of his story and the power of his activism, which happened all the way to the last, his mom too. I think of so many students that come here, and we're not mandated. Future Now is not a mandated place. Like they come on their own. Something happens where they realize that I have the right to aspire and I should be able, I have a place, right? I should be able to find my place. We have a graduation every year. Angela is always there. And basically the graduation is to celebrate the accomplishment from getting your GED and moving on to college, right? And it's a lot of people, I mean, I think we have something like 700 to 800 people every year come to acknowledge the students. And it is the best day of the year, Future Now, because because of what it signifies. You know, many of the students say the first time they got that diploma is the first time they felt smart, because all their lives they were told different, you know. And so changing the story, that's what I think about. I think about what are those things that you've seen in the media all your life that Erica was referring to, that you've been conditioned to believe, and the identity that you have, you know, told yourself. You know, when you come to BCC, we don't see that identity. We see the future and where you can go from here, and we start there, right where you are. So changing the narrative, changing the stories, is part of this work, and it's basically, I think, the one thing that motivates all of us. And all of us have changed our stories at some point. There has been a mentor. There has been someone that has told you, you know, sorry, I got interrupted. So I'm going to stop talking. You know, I can talk all day, Eileen. So, but thank you so much. I'm very inspired hearing you guys, both Attica and Kianja. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth. Kianga, you said, I'm sorry, Attica, you said, our leaders are amongst us. And when you're doing this work of mass production and shaping story, you're thinking that, right? Our leaders are here, our leaders are amongst us. And you've spoken so prophetically about Khalif Browder, and understanding him as one of the firmament of civil rights leaders. Tell us about that. Tell us how you tried to communicate that in your work on the Khalif Browder story. I know you were a field producer. I know you weren't, you know, the central, but that's clearly a big part of your work and a big part of your, you know, what you're sort of proclaiming. So can you talk a little bit about that? Khalif as part of this firmament of civil rights leaders, who I don't think that's part of the story you're telling, and I don't think everyone sees that. Benefit from that, from your work and from the work of the Khalif Browder story.
Yeah, I remember one time I spoke. My niece was doing a Black History paper, and they gave her I think 3 or 4 people to do it on, possibly Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Frederick Douglass. And now my niece is 25, so this was probably about 10 years ago. And I told her, you're not doing a paper on any one of those, because if you do a paper on those people, that means Black people haven't done anything since, right? So the reality is there are people in our midst that are doing things to push humanity and civil rights forward. And I believe Khalif Browder. See, our problem is we look outside often for the things that we have within, right? And I believe that Khalif Browder, to me, should be placed on that mantle, on that Mount Rushmore, in that same category as some of our foremost, our most revered and renowned civil rights activists. Yes, Dr. King, Khalif Browder is shoulder to shoulder with him. Malcolm X, Khalif Browder is there. Rosa Parks, Sojourner Truth, everybody. Because again, you fight with what you have, and you fight the way you know how to fight. Considering he took on his plight at 16 years old. 16 years old. And all he needed to do was say, I am guilty, and he could have served a little bit of time and got out of jail. You know, or they might have given him time served and got out of jail. Khalif specifically noted that if I say yes to this, then there's somebody coming after me that they're going to do this to again. And because of that, he endured all of the pain, all of the beatings, all of the mental abuse, or all of everything that you can possibly conceive that he went through. He did that while still having the option to stop it as a teenager. as a teenager. So his vision for his people should never be undermined. His vision for young men and young women, knowing that this happens in his community often, should never be diminished. That man, that young man, should be on our Mount Rushmore of, and I don't even want to say on our Mount Rushmore, in the upper echelon of our civil rights leaders. Because, and here's the thing, the reason why we can't hear about Khalif in that vein is because people will look at him and say, that's me too. That's me too. People look at Martin Luther King and say, oh, that's an old man. He went to Morehouse College. He was a preacher. He had everything going right for him. You know what I'm saying? No, Khalif is you. You know what I'm saying? And as it relates to mind control and media, if you're constantly told that you're a nigga, and if you're constantly told that you're a bitch, you will begin to believe that. DMX once said, we don't like the songs that we like the songs that we hear over and over again. That speaks to mind control as it relates to media. We need to do more of comprehensive studying on people like Khalif Browder and many others, mind you, many others that are out there. There's some that are not, that have not had these horrific situations happen to them, but there are some that are leading the charge in other ways that we need to really recognize as some of our foremost leaders today. And this way we can stop doing papers on people centuries old and decades old and start recognizing that history is created in the present. And that's my 2 cents.
That history is created in the present, right? And that truth is still speaking. It's not settled, right? The work of justice is not something, obviously, that's not something that happened in the past, which implies, that it's done. Or maybe implies that it's not possible to make further change, right? If we're speaking of justice and justice movements in the past tense, we're suggesting that they got as far as they could get, and not that both that injustice is obviously still being enacted on people, but that people are resisting it and creating new paths forward in the present. Yeah, I mean, there's this way in which we always so often speak of movement in the past tense that makes it safe. That's what it does, right? We elevate these names by time they're safe. We wouldn't have been reading papers about any of the people you named when they were working, because then they were controversial in some communities.
No, we hated them all. Well, we as in mainstream hated them all, and that's the thing. And there was something else that was mentioned earlier. I just believe, like, when you live in your purpose, like, it was something I think Ms. Piamp said. I just really think it's important for these children, not children, I'm going to say young folks, because I'm sure I'm older than a vast majority of them, right? I'm going to say young folks. I just really think it's really important for them to understand that, you never put a period where God puts a comma. You know what I'm saying? Your story is not over. You know what I'm saying? And we all go through bumps. Adults and older people are not problem free. We just got better with learning how to deal with life. You know what I'm saying? We recognize that this too is a moment, and moments have beginning, middles, and ends. The issue with being unequipped to deal with the moment is you believe the moment is life. You believe that you're in it and it's never going to end, and this is your life. I don't care if it's the first time you got fired from a job, the first time you got incarcerated, the first time you broke up with the love of your life. You think everything is happening to you, and you think it's happening in that moment is life. When you get a little bit more experience, you realize that this is a moment, and you just take a breather and you find your way through the moment. And I have faith in our future. A lot of people look at our future and be like, yeah, this is not the way I wanted to. No, I have faith in our future. I have faith in the youngsters, because I'm looking at how they're doing their best to change the world with what they have. I don't care if that's a cell phone. I don't care if that's social media. I don't care what it is. They're doing their best with the tools that they're given, and I applaud them sincerely. And I'll stop so others can jump in.
Thank you. I wanted to say to people who are listening and watching that I believe it's a chat function you can use to post questions that are then going to be ferried in, and I'll pose them to the panelists. But to Kianga and Elizabeth, so we're celebrating these tremendous films, right? We're celebrating the power of this storytelling, the power of documentary film. And documentary has such immediacy, right? It brings us into a story, as Kianga was saying, the individual story, not the policy problem. And I think we're all familiar with that experience of watching a documentary film about something we knew about or had some inkling of, or about some issue we were heretofore utterly ignorant of, right? Some water rights in a country we're not familiar with. And you have that feeling after the 50 minutes of being completely shook, right? Or completely on fire. And then you turn off the film and you might be kind of inspired by, all right, well, I got to go be part of it. Or you might feel oh, good Lord, there's so much to do. And what is my role in this? So I wanted to ask a question about that. And how do we move from outrage to action? How do we move from being the recipients of knowledge delivered to us in all of these amazing films we were able to watch and that we can continue to watch throughout the weekend, and move that into action, into movement, so that it's not, a Netflix moment and then it's over. And I think maybe I would pose that first to Kianga and then bring that to Elizabeth.
Sure. I think that's the perennial question, right? Is particularly coming out of the summer of 2020 and the kind of historic uprisings and protests in response to the inept COVID response from the federal government, but also the epidemic of police brutality that was so brutally captured by the lynching of George Floyd. And I think, there has been a question as to whether the protests had any impact, considering that there has been very little legislation, particularly concerning the police in the year and 16 months since those protests first exploded. And so I think this question of how do we move, I would say not from protest to politics, which I think is a bad formulation from the 1960s that proved to really be short-sighted. The idea that, well, if we just get most of the activists into public office, that then we would have people like us who look like us making the laws and the rules. We've had about 50 or so years of that, and it hasn't necessarily worked out the way that I think some people anticipated. So the question is, how do you get people activated politically around some of these issues? And I think that it's a big question for the social movements that we have now, where it's not always clear what the entry points into political activism are, especially when there is a model of professional activism that is kind of upheld. So you have foundation-funded small organizations that have paid staffs, but that is not necessarily a way for just a regular person who wants to do more than go to a protest. And so I think one of the biggest challenges for people who are involved in social justice organizing and who see this as a critical calling, not just for a few people, but as a way to really harness the anger and energy of millions of people, is how do we build organizations that create easy entry points into grassroots activism, grassroots organizing for ordinary people. And I don't necessarily think that that those that those organizations exist right now. It doesn't mean that there aren't many groups. So, you know, we could say that as a first step is to find out what groups exist around you, whether it's on campus. You know, there's always people who are organizing around some aspect of inequity that exists on college campuses. What is happening in your community, that people may have come together to organize and to change something, to get together, to fight around something, to engage and struggle around something. Are you in a position to initiate such an activity, whether it's on campus or in some other area of organizing? And so I think those are some of the questions that, you know, people need to ask themselves. But I think that there's a bigger question that, you know, which is how do we activate the enormous numbers of people who were radicalized by the ineptness of, who were consistently radicalized by the ineptness of our various government bodies, whether they're on the local, state, or federal level, who have been radicalized by the lawlessness of police, whether it's in New York, you know, shoving people off trains for complaining that the police aren't wearing masks. As you know, not even the most extreme example of the lawlessness that pervades police departments in this country. There are these bigger questions about how do we engage and activate the largest number of people possible. And so I think that we have to look at those two things together. There are immediate ways in which people can try to get involved in political activism, but then there are the bigger questions about how do we build big organizations that actually have the ability and capacity to influence politics.
I think this is a great time to shout out the work of Bronx Community College, and particularly the work that grew out of the radicalization, the involvement in those. I think it's important to remember a year later how, of course, how angry and heartbroken all the marching was in the summer of 2020, but also how joyful it was. One of the marches I was at was in the Bronx, from Fordham Road down to the Bronx County Courthouse along the concourse. And the moment that stayed with me from that march, obviously, and you know, I grew up going to marches, I wrote books about social movement, it wasn't my first time at a rodeo, was the absolute joy as we were walking down the concourse from Fordham Road, maybe somewhere in the 170s. And this was this wasn't white people in Park Slope marching, right? Like, this was a march in the Bronx with Black people. There's a group of young women in their, like, maybe in their 20s, who started doing a call and response, and they were dancing, and they were basically doing like a step routine, clapping and dancing, ecstatic, right? And saying, like, have you heard Black joy? Have you heard Black joy? Have you heard I'm here and I'm proud and I'm Black joy? And it was, you know, I mean, I see a lot of things in religious context. It was an absolute ecstatic moment on the concourse with, you know, some large number of thousands of people, not in a performative march, right? Not in a, like, I'm going to post this picture on Instagram and I get my little cookie, but this was the real deal. This was the thing that was happening. And in the midst of that outrage and pain and you know, the power that sorrow has, there's also this tremendous hope and pride. And so anyway, I try to revisit that moment a lot, actually, because there's something that is so very different than victimhood in that, that is so very, very potent in there. But I wanted to talk about, or to just kind of acknowledge the work of BCC, which is really kind of harnessing this potential and hope and possibility, which has instituted a social justice certificate, which maybe sounds, well, what's a certificate? But it's great, right? Like, what we measure and what we name is something we're saying that we value, especially in these institutional ways. And so that's creating these easy entry points to help students who've been radicalized, who are able to access that anger, to start moving it into change and into lifelong engagement. And lifelong engagement where they feel a sense of authority. Oh, like actually, I've thought through a bunch of these issues. I've got some training on how to do meetings. I've got some training on how to do outreach. And now I'm equipped and kind of have this mantle and can carry that into whatever my work is, whether it becomes, funded work through some big foundation, or whether it becomes my work as an activist who is working as a nurse, or my work as an activist who's working as a teacher. So that's tremendous work. And further work at BCC, Elizabeth, is this mantle that you inherit because of Khalif Browder's relationship with the college. Can you talk to us about the Khalif Browder Scholarship?
So thank you. So I think that also speaks to moving from ideology to action. I think examples like the Khalif Brothers, that's a great example actually, Eileen, because the scholarship was actually created, I believe, by Angela and Eddie Bayadel. This was their idea, and it is meant to help other students who have been part of the criminal justice system and who are in college. It's endowed, so it will be able to be given every year to one student, and I think Angela is hoping to make it more available to others. But I know this was Khalif's hope, was to continue to help and continue, as Arika mentioned, to speak for other young people. I've worked in Rikers Island for a lot of years, and I always say that we knew what was going on, but it wasn't until Khalif that the whole thing came public and became a public issue, and things needed to be reformed. It wasn't until Khalif. I mean, we created the Department of Corrections created an adolescent board to look at solitary confinement for adolescents and to look at the treatment of adolescents on Rikers Island right after this all happened with Khalif. I don't think that would have happened without him. And I think it makes sense to have the scholarship in his name, to be and to keep his legacy alive. I was sharing with Arika that a lot of the young people we work with now don't know Khalif, and I would love, I know there's another film that's being made to recognize his legacy by Cisa Bueno, but I would love for everyone, as Arika mentioned, to learn about his life, to know that he's one of us. As he mentioned, sometimes we think people that are geniuses need to have a certain level of educational backgrounds, and I'm very, very happy that BCC was able to create this opportunity for all the students to support them and to maintain his legacy. I also want to say, BCC has also been a place that has always welcomed students who have had any form of involvement with the criminal justice system. We changed the term from formerly incarcerated to justice impacted, because we also find that a lot of our students have moms, dads that may be in jail, relatives, other friends, and they are also impacted. There's a different kind of trauma in the Bronx. I keep saying that, that sometimes we don't see. It's not visible to the eye, but we can easily re-traumatize someone if we don't understand what it's like to be impacted by the criminal justice system. So, I want to thank Angela again. I know she's here and she hears me for always promoting the scholarship and for always recruiting students who may be going through hardships due to incarcerations or being impacted, and for supporting their journey in college. Because we do believe that education is part of that action that is needed, to be able to sit at the table and have leadership roles and change the system a little bit. We need our students to become, teachers, educators, administrators in CUNY, because they know what it's like. They walk the walk, and they can affect a lot of other people that have been in the same shoes. Thank you.
We have a question from Stephanie Batista, who is the Khalif Browder Scholarship recipient for this year, who's in the with us in this production now, and so she's communicated that question through the chat. So Stephanie's question is to Dr. Taylor. Do you feel that political activism has died due to a lack of knowledge of history with a younger population? question coming from the Khalif Browder scholar, Stephanie Batista.
Congratulations, Stephanie, first of all. Congratulations on receiving such an important award and scholarship. No, I think if anything, there's even more activism, but the problem is that we often are cut off from our history so that we don't necessarily understand the current context within historical perspective, which is to say that there is a tremendous amount to learn from our various histories of social movements and social activism. So when Attica rightly points out the way that our mainstream public officials or the mainstream media focus on a handful of Black activists, to me, the problem isn't just that they focus on these people, but that they don't actually focus on their ideas. They don't actually focus on their politics. They don't actually focus on their relationship to the movements of which they were a part of, so that we get every year this ridiculous caricatured understanding of Martin Luther King's ideas in politics. And we don't know that he was a radical. We don't know that he embraced young Black people who were in the streets rebelling in the 1960s. Instead, we get this very lame picture of, nonviolence, colorblindness. So much information has been drained from his politics and life that even right-wing Republicans hold him up as some kind of hero to their movement. That's how deranged the history has become. And so what we need to do, and one of the reasons why my experiences at City College were so important is because I had professors who taught history from below, who talked about the history of social movements, who talked about the debates and the fragmentation and the fractures within movements, not as some sort of spectacle, but as a way for us to understand the need for political debate within our movements. Because at City College in the 1990s, there's huge social movements across the CUNY campuses to fight budget cuts that were coming down from Albany. And, our movements took political education seriously, and we took the history of these social movements seriously. And so that, I think, is what is missing. So people still fight, but often, not necessarily with all of the political tools that they could have if we had more of an informed engagement with the past, with our history. Do we know about the Young Lords? Do we know about the relationship between the Black Panthers and the Young Lords? Not so that we can answer trivia, not so we can, be informed at parties to have interesting conversations, but so that we can understand the history of both tensions between Black and Brown attempts at coalitions, but also where we have been able to forge the bounds between our different movements, where our movements have overlapped, and where we can learn from that for today and the struggles that we're engaged in today.
I think it's this constant reseeding that needs to happen, or rewatering that needs to happen, of going back and visiting the movements of the past in detail and in specificity and in complexity and controversy, to keep heart in the new ones, and to understand what the new ones need to do. There's so many, not hallmark lessons, but real strategic lessons in the allegiances and the disallegiances of previous. One of the questions we got from people who are watching with us, I'm going to pose to Attica, which is, I think it kind of works perfectly with what Dr. Taylor's saying. this is a classic question. What can one person do? And I think actually this is very much bound up in how we don't teach social movement in mainstream education. We don't teach movement, we teach great individuals, and then we're left with telling kids one person can make a difference. Attica, can you talk a little bit about that to answer this student's question? What's my role as an individual? And what change can I make? This is coming from a student whose perspective is outrage and heart sickness over immigration injustice. What do I do? And what's my role in this?
It's MC Rakim says it's simple, ain't it? But quite clever. That's a very simple question, but it's a very powerful question. You start with your passion. You start with that thing that you believe in, that you cannot be moved off of. You cannot be moved off of that block. That's where you start. If it's immigration, if you come from 3-4 generations of immigrants and immigration is your passion, that's where you start. You know, like if whatever, see, when you get co-opted into movements, you can get shifted off of your goal, if that's your goal. When you have a dire passion, a burning desire to change something, then that's where you start. And you start with what you have. You start with that. Not only do you start with the passion that moves you, you start with the passion that you work on every day. Like I said, if it's teaching, if it's singing, if it's media, if it's TikTok, you use your TikTok in a way that pushes your position forward. If it's no matter what, if it's art, you do it with that. And when you combine those two different passions, then you will never stop. Like you never stop painting the things that you believe in. And then when you show your painting and someone asks you, then you just educated someone else. I'm here because my passion is the ascension of our people. And my other passion is filmmaking and storytelling. I'm an author as well. So I will never stop doing what I'm doing. And then the other thing I said earlier, I believe a successful person is the person who positively influence those over whom they have influence. So if it's 2 people or 2 million, if I believe that in my household, I'm raising my child to forward my position on life, or to believe that you don't treat people a certain way because of this or that, you know, that's moving in that direction. Now, if I have access to millions and millions of people through my Twitter and I'm lying to them and telling them nonsense, then I'm not a successful person. I don't care how you slice it. I don't care if you add up their money. I'm talking about a successful human being, not a successful business person. And those are two different things. So you start where you are, you start with what you have, and you start with what you believe in. And the other thing is, on the lower level, you have to recognize your strength. If you're one of those people that people gravitate to, if you're in 2nd grade and people want to play with you, you know, and then you're in 5th grade and people want to play with you, and you're a senior, maybe you might run for senior president, or you might galvanize your block association that's been dormant for 10 years. I don't have the answers to how you start. The answers lie within you. Once you follow your passion and you listen to what's burning inside of you, you have to answer to yourself and heed the call. That's how it's done. Oftentimes, if you are put in a position to jump on someone else's bandwagon, it doesn't really work that well, and you can get shifted off of it. That's just my opinion.
That's perfect. That's a perfect closing. That's perfect, inspiring and powerful words for us to leave with. I continue to be amazed by what can happen in Zoom, you know, this 1.5 years, 2 years almost now that we're living this way. What a beautiful collection of ideas and exchange and connection that we were able to have in our separate little boxes, which I think is maybe an important takeaway to think about movement and to think about broad social movements, each in our specific, what we're called for, and what our opportunities and what our skills are, but all of it in an advancing forward for radical justice across many forms. And among you three excellent panelists, we have three people doing really different types of work, called in different kinds of ways to do this work of justice. But I'm so grateful that you were with us. I'm so thankful to Bronx Community College and the Bronx Social Justice Film Festival. Hopefully, right, this is the first of many years, and we'll be back together next year, practical and inspired, and in the flesh, we hope. So thank you, everybody who was part of this, panelists for being with us, Bronx Community College for making it happen, Deborah's vision for bringing together this festival, and Angela's for putting this panel together so that we can think practically about justice. Thanks, everybody.